To pin myself. I just want to say hi to everyone. I'm Hyla. I'm the exhibition coordinator for the Marion Art Gallery, and we are currently hosting a traveling exhibition put together by En Foco, and it's called Dos Mundos, Reconstructing Narratives. And I'm really pleased to introduce you to Erika Morillo, who is one of the photographers featured in this exhibition. And we titled tonight Portal to Somewhere Else, because a lot of Erika's work has that a feeling of that you're being led into a portal to somewhere else. So Erika, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a gift during this pandemic to be with other people or to be in conversation. So I'm very happy to be here. And I brought some work to show you guys, just some images and to talk a little bit about my practice. I'd like to encourage you to ask any questions or, to kind of engage in conversation. I'd love to hear from you, your impressions or any comments. And I'm originally from Dominican Republic and moved to the States 15 years ago to do my master's. And I stayed. It was originally just supposed to be coming here to study, but I really fell in love with New York City, and that kind of like jump-started my artistic practice. I currently teach photobook, mostly photobook classes. I'm very invested in the photobook as an art form and as another way of sharing photography. In the midst of completing my MFA, which is in the intersection of photography and writing at Ithaca College. Is this experimental program called Image Text Ithaca. And they're also a publishing house. So they're very focused on photo books as well. And I'm also a part-time teacher at the Center for Book Arts, where I teach photo book making and book binding and how to turn your photographic projects into books. So yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited.
So should I start the presentation now, Hyla, or you want
to?
Okay.
I would love to see some work. Okay. I'm going to jump right in.
So I brought some specific projects to show you, and I just want to give you a little bit of background before I start showing the images. And, basically with photography, to me, I started photographing when I became a single mother. As I mentioned, I moved to New York to do my master's degree. And in the middle of studying it, I became pregnant. And the life that I had envisioned for myself quickly changed to something completely different. And that kind of got me started in the practice of photography as a way of accepting my current reality, documenting it both at home and outside. But also as a way of rebelling against it. I had this fear of like, oh, I'm only now going to be a mother and there's nothing else to me. So I think exploring an artistic side, which I hadn't tapped into, was something that was really useful to me. So I want to share my screen to show you some of those initial images I started to make in New York City, which became a kind of playground for me. So let me see. I'll share here. Can you guys see my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry, I am terrible with technology. Terrible. So trying to see if I can choose. Yeah, perfect. So let's do. So in my image making in the city, the first thing that I was really attracted to was, I'm going to try to do this manually and stop it. The thing that I was really attracted to first was the subway, because it was such first of all, coming from Dominican Republic and not having like a real support system when I moved into New York City, photography came to be this way of connecting with others in New York, which is like paradoxical because New York is a city filled with people, but you can be very disconnected. Like that sense of like intimacy or like real conversation sometimes does not happen in the rapidness of the city. So I really fell in love with just going into the subway and seeing like kind of started to document these intimate moments that people were experiencing or that I was coming across. And I felt it was a way of me feeling like I started to belong, that I also started to express things about myself and the way that I thought. Like, I always see photography as this way of understanding what I think afterwards when I see the image. Like, for example, with this image, I feel it relates a lot to this sort of like conflicting identities or realities. I see this as like an inner reflection of how I feel about love. Like, I feel love is a wonderful thing, but I also feel it can be very challenging. And there are moments where you're heartbroken. So this could be like an internal image. So this was something that photography allowed me to start to express myself differently. And also, I started to become really fascinated with the photographers that documented New York City, like Gary Winogrand and Bruce Davidson and Bruce Gilden, all these people that went into the city and made these images that started to make you ask yourself questions. And I started to try to emulate that and see how within a frame, instead of just photographing one person, how could I integrate more into the frame that could ask something else. So here, for example, with this image, I saw this mom with her kids sleeping on her lap. It was in the middle of the day. And I just started to ask myself, like, why are they so sleepy in the middle of the day? Did they get enough rest? Is there something happening at home? But also the kid on the left, which seems to be kind of like disconnected or awake. What is happening? Why is he not tired? So in my practice, I try to make this kind of images that can make the viewer ask larger questions. And also, like, the moments that you come across in the city, like this gentleman with a tuxedo, also in the middle of the day. And, he just looked very regal, like out of a movie. Little moments like people sprinkled with snow coming into the subway, and like literally 2 minutes later, all the snow was melted and this image was completely different. I think I took another frame and it was just wet afterwards. So the kind of immediacy of street photography is something that I really fell in love with. Just started to see how I could play with different frames. And I think in this act of seeing others, I also started to see myself. And that's when I became interested in the practice of making self-portraits, which I'm going to show. I think they come next. So now in like all of my photographic projects, I kind of find myself playing with this idea of inserting myself in the image. I'm very inspired by the work of Lee Freelander and Francesca Woodman, who really experimented with the self-portrait as a way of, understand who you are. What do you have to say in the world? And I just find great joy in doing this. And it's a practice that I carry almost daily. I take self-portraits and really try to push myself to see how that image can become different the next time without becoming repetitive. And also, it is very, very challenging to make self-portraits at this moment in the age of the selfie without it feeling vain or without it feeling like every other image out there. So I really try to kind of experiment and explore with this. And it gives me a great sense of joy. And just the little things that can happen. Like when I took this photograph later on, when I was processing it, I noticed that the drop of water landed right in my eye, or things like this that kind of are very playful. And another thing I wanted to mention about photography or my practice is that to me, photography is all about the act of seeing what images you can find rather than thinking or the image in my head and trying to recreate it. I know photographers work in different ways, but for me, photography has always been about the act of going somewhere and seeing what image I can find rather than thinking of the image a priori or conceptually.
Erika, you call those self-portraits, but you seem to be like disguised or kind of incognito, which
Yeah.
which gives them like this magical otherworldly feel. Is that something that you do intentionally, or is it just the way it happens?
No, I think it's just the way that it happens. I think what happens sometimes with taking photos in New York is that you don't know if people are going to get really mad at you or they're not going to care. So I think the act of disguising myself, like behind the glass or in a corner, is maybe a way of not going into that confrontation. But I have also made work, which I'm going to show you in my other project about Coney Island, where I am facing the people right on, and I'm looking for that exchange. And 98% of the times is wonderful. People, approach me and or smile or are unbothered. But there have been specific situations where I felt that I have been intruding their personal space. And this is the next image I want to show you, and the last one in this presentation, which is this image that years after I took it, I feel very conflicted about it and not proud of it. After years of photographing the city and just seeing what moments felt compelling, I wasn't really thinking about the person I was photographing. It was mostly about making the image. And when I was walking the streets in New York and I saw this photograph of this advertising that is very aspirational and this lighting kind of like choreography, and underneath there were two homeless men sleeping, and they felt like they were in dance in the image. And when I made the image, I was thinking of that, like, oh, this is a fantastic image with how they are in sync. But afterwards, and after I kept educating myself and taking classes and learning about the ethics of photography, when you're photographing vulnerable people, when you're photographing communities that are that have pain, how is your image making? How can you make your image making not predatory? So afterwards, I felt like I would not want to photograph this moment again, because I feel that I wasn't really adding anything of value to that conversation. I was just making an image. And that's something that has really changed in my practice and as I've grown. And now my street photography is not that confrontational, or I'm not really looking into people's pain unless I am making a concerted effort to spend time with them and to make a project that where I'm gonna really talk in depth about what they're going through.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us and sharing that vulnerability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that by no means I feel that I am here to kind of, let me see, I'm gonna put this right. By no means I feel that I am here to kind of like pass on knowledge, but just to talk about the hurdles and the kind of the hardship of also making work and learning as you go, and allowing yourself to change and to change your perspective. My perspective on photography has really changed throughout the years, and I'm gonna talk about that when I talk about the project with my son. But for now, I want to show you this other project, which is about Coney Island. And Coney Island is actually my favorite place in New York. The place that I feel the most at home. I think it has to do something about my Caribbean roots and growing up in an island, being close to the water and to the sea, that I feel very at home in it. And I also feel that it's one of the places that conserves that sense of New York City that is very diverse, very loud, very unapologetic, not gentrified. And that's something very beautiful that is getting extinguished in the city more and more. So this project spans 10 years that I have been, every summer I go and photograph. And what I do in my practice is that I go with my headphones and I walk the shore for hours, just photographing. Sometimes I stop, I maybe buy a beer in the boardwalk or a hot dog, and then I go and walk and just watch the sun go down and keep photographing. Coney Island is a very diverse place where you have Latino communities and African American communities in unison with Eastern European communities. Like there's a huge Russian community there in Brighton Beach, just right next to it. And I just really like to go and fish for those moments, like this tender moment of this couple of ladies here that to me just felt like, I don't know, it defied my notion of what these ladies were Russian. So it defied my notion of like, maybe I thought they would be more stoic or not show emotions. And the fact that they were being so tender just made me think like, you have all these preconceived notions about people and you don't know them, you know. So photography allows me to explore that. And also seeing parallels, like these three ladies and then these three kids that were in the water. They also
I love this one.
Yeah, they have like a salsa live music every Saturday, and everybody's dancing. And this American, you know, lady, she was like dancing salsa with her John Lennon shirt. And to me, that felt like, oh, this is so New York, you know, this kind of like melting pot. This is my son when he was little, and going to Coney Island was one of the things that we enjoyed most, that really allowed me also to connect with photography from like a more documentary approach. Like I was also documenting our life in the city, creating this kind of family album. It wasn't only strangers that I was photographing, but our life as well. And just like people everywhere. Sometimes I would walk and there's like people in every little corner of the frame, and you know, that kind of like chaotic element of Coney Island I really enjoy. The contrasts, again, reflections in water are two things that are common threads in my work, that I don't necessarily look for them intentionally, but when I am editing my work or seeing my images, I see that I go back to it and I see that they play this role of like a kind of cleansing or a kind of like a different perspective on the world that is out there or the world in front of me. Like I'm trying to find my way of seeing. And sometimes that is, you know, flipping the image or seeing what I can see in the water rather than what it's actually in front of me. In this particular moment, there was an airplane going by. There's a lot of those with advertisement in Coney Island. I just thought this image was like so beautiful. They were transfixed by it, and it was just a very intimate moment. Or here, where these teenagers found a baby shark in the almost at the shore. So yeah, and my favorite part of it is this boy here in the back of the shoulder, kind of like he didn't want to get close to it, like he was a little bit scared. And I don't know, just the range of emotions from like holding the shark to like being kind of afraid. This is one of those instances where I went to take the picture and the person came and approached me. Like I went to take this photo of this girl dancing and she went right up to my camera and gave me like that confrontation. And I love it when that happens. This is my son as well. I love to kind of try to find sometimes that sense of movement. And I think if I look sometimes at my self-portraits or photos that I take of my son or at home, they tend to be like either more quiet or static. And in Coney Island, the feeling is different. Like there's this kind of dancing happening, which I think emulates how I feel inside when I am making them. These were the children in line to get Nathan's hot dogs in the boardwalk. So with these two projects, I've shown you a little bit of like how I started to explore the city itself as a way of like finding my identity or connecting with a sense of place. But at the same time that I was doing this, I was also photographing at home. intimacy and life with my son, which is my central project, and where those images that are in the exhibition came from. And this is a project that I decided to name Umbral. Umbral in Spanish is like that threshold, that space in between. And I decided to call it Umbral because when I was editing the images at the end of the project, I saw that a lot of times my son was either with his eyes closed or in this state of like suspension, like in that dreamlike state where you're like half awake, but like falling asleep. And I just saw it as like a beautiful metaphor of his transitioning out of his childhood into his teens, like his innocence is waning. And like, as a mom, I felt conflicted about him losing that innocence and growing up, because there were a lot of things about my own childhood that were very dysfunctional. I grew up in an abusive household, and there were a lot of things that I carried as baggage. And I was so afraid that he was going to grow up and kind of see my fears about mothering him, if I had done a good job, or, you know, if what I'm passing on to him. So with these images, what I tried to do, or what I started to do, was just to be very present at home and started to document our life. I started to pay close attention to those quiet moments. And I found that, again, you know, reflections or the mirrors were something that came in this work more than in the street work. Like in the street work, it was a lot of reflections, but in my work with Umbral, there was a lot of mirrors. And I felt that this presence of mirrors was a way of like his childhood reflecting mine in a way, and the shadows in unison with like also the light coming in. Me feeling conflicted and finding these different emotions about motherhood. To me, motherhood has been wonderful in a way of redefining my own dysfunctional upbringing, but has also been a very terrifying place, because there were times that I felt I couldn't do the good job that I wanted to. So I definitely had to learn. And it's like a lot of trial and error about becoming vulnerable and allowing this person growing up to be close to me. Photographing those moments that were also kind of difficult when he was little and I was overworked and I was tired all the time, or sometimes, you know, I lost it or I yelled at him, and like, you know, also the harshness of being a single mom.
There's so much in that photograph with the reflection, again, the mirror, and where you can, you know, see your bed and personal items on the bed, and then into the house, and him like hiding. Is that in a closet or?
This is in the space between the door and the wall. So he didn't want me to take this photograph because he was mad at me. I can't even remember why we were fighting. And I think it's one of the only images I have where I photographed him when he was upset. Because most of the time I photograph him in either tender moments or moments of joy. But this was like a very intimate moment, and also because he was naked. And I don't show this image a lot when I exhibit work. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable with photographing their children naked or photographing other people naked. To me, I don't see it as a problem or exploitative if the moment is genuine. But it is a controversial thing to do, I think, and it raises a lot of questions when I first started to do this work. Like, why are you photographing him? Like, how does he feel about being photographed? And when he was growing up, he was very excited about being photographed. He really liked to be in the spotlight. He gobbled it up. This was in Coney Island. One of my favorite images of him in the water. Just, you know, a moment of pure joy in our lives. Again, with this project, I started to see self-portraits coming in. There are a couple of images in this project. This one and this one, where we're both in the same image at once. And they were both in moments when we were going through a lot of stuff at home, and we kind of bonded over that hardship. Sometimes it was financial hardship. Sometimes it was having to move countries, because we lived a short period of time in Chile for 2 years. So having to be uprooted and come back. So in these moments of like hardship, I made these images where we're both fused. And I feel that they are the moments that express that closeness and that kind of weirdness as well in that closeness. Like here, his head is kind of tilted. Or here, part of his body is like welded into mine, this weird like centaur or weird like mythical creature. But I loved how the project started to also show me aspects of our relationship. Again, like those broken parts and, you know, what we carry, thinking about motherhood from that sense of fragility as well, how fragile that experience can be, how vulnerable your children are, how vulnerable you are in that experience. Like, how do you feel? Like you have so many demands at you. Sometimes you don't have any more to give. Everything is like pecking at you in a way. And then this is...
Can I say something?
Yes.
Okay. I really appreciate how, well, first of all, you don't use, from what I've seen so far, you don't really take photos in color.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that because to me, when you really want to express something, it's so helpful to express it in black and white because it's just raw. All you see is what's there and not the distractions, because sometimes colors can be very distracting. I'm a photographer too. So just seeing how you're so connected to emotions and connections and relationships and the things that you see, and they're very well displayed in your photography. Like I can immediately see, I'm very empathic, so I can see every picture, like what emotion you were trying to communicate or what you felt. And then it kind of reestablishes the thought in my head that every photo tells a story, whether you see it or not. And you really tell a really nice story with each photo.
Thank you so much for saying that. And the comment about the black and white is something that I have asked myself a lot, because sometimes I make work in color, but it doesn't really reflect like aspects that I love about photography, or the first influence.
It's not the same.
Yeah. I mean, color is wonderful, but it's like almost a separate subject in your photo. And I really have great respect for photographers that can work with color well. I feel that I am not one of them, maybe because the images that are seared in my head are the ones like, you know, Francesca Woodman and Sally Mann, and like also I love vintage photography, or this black and white image that feels, you know, ancient or from another time that feels timeless. I'd love to experiment with color, but for now it's been mostly black and white. But with this particular image, I took this image at a moment my son was 5, and he was really interested in starting to take the camera too and say, well, I want to photograph you too. So for a period of maybe a couple of years, it was kind of collaborative where he photographed as well. So let me see. So this is an image that he took after with my phone in that same spot where I photographed him. This is him taking a self-portrait at home. This image he took of me as I was reading. I really love his perspective of like how he cut the frame and how it's a little bit tilted. The tenderness of him photographing my hand while I was reading. This is another image he made. Another self-portrait. And then, of course, I turned into an obnoxious mom, and I kept asking him, "What's it? You want to go photograph today? You want to go make images?" Until he said, "I am done. No more images, no more photos." And then I was banned. So that only lasted for a little bit, and I think it was my fault. And, you know, I really think that this image, although it seems completely disjointed from the other ones, is at the core of the work. And I'm actually going to show you how I utilized it in the photo book form, alongside that other image of him laying in the flowers, because to me, that represents the kind of polarity of my own history in motherhood, like what I bring from how I was mothered and the promise that he represents. So flowers also, like I found him a lot in bloom or in nature or in the elements. And then it was also this work, an act of observation, of like admiring and observing my child, being proud of him, being enamored by him. This is when I took him to Dominican Republic for the first time, and his connection with his roots, with part of his roots. And I love this image because it feels like he's up in the clouds. This is this little island in Dominican Republic called Cayo Levantado, which is a small kind of mound of sand that comes up. So when you're standing in it, everything else is like down, and it feels like you're on top of like this little mountain, but it's made of sand. And it's I was really happy to be there with him. This is when we lived in Chile, which is where his father is from. So this is his other part of the roots, and how different the sea is. This is the Caribbean Ocean, and like more Caribbean sand, and this is like rocky Pacific Ocean, and also that, like two aspects of his roots. And this is one of the images that is in the exhibition. And I like this image because it feels a little bit like Alice in Wonderland-ish in a way. Like you're a little disoriented, you're going like to another place when you look at the water, but when you look at the ground and you get grounded, you see that what you're seeing is actually a person, but the focus of the image, what you have in front of you, is a dream. The punctum of the image is a dream, but in the bottom is the reality. So I really like this in this image, how I turned the reflection into the main point and the reality into the back. Or this image where he's going through this curtain of water, this kind of passage.
Can I ask you how you took the photo with the center of Umbral in the exhibition? I've been to the exhibition. Hyla was leading me in it. And you have yourself taking a photo.
This one.
In the mirror. Yeah. And then you have kind of like that portal right there in the center, which is this picture. And then you have, he was like, "I don't want you to take photos of me anymore." And he has his hands inside the trees. Because you had kind of like told that story in the summary next to, in your voice note, kind of that journey. And I wanted to mention, that this photo was the one photo on the exhibition that I felt the most connected to. It just instantly drew me to her. Like that's the first thing I saw when I looked at your three images. Like that portal you were talking about, and then I looked to the left and I looked to the right, and I kept coming back to that one. And I wanted to know how you took the photo. Did you take it like regular, and then you just flipped it 180, or did you take it upside down?
Yeah, I took it regular, but I was noticing the huge reflection of water underneath my feet when I was taking the image. It was like most of the image was black because of this water. And as I was going through my images afterwards in post-production and I flipped it, I just like something else came up. And it's something that I have maybe just in 2 or 3 of my images. I don't use it a lot because it tends to be like a gimmick. And there are people that really hate this photo. I was telling Hyla about this, that some of my purist photographers really dislike it because they feel it's a gimmick, you know, the same gimmick of like the puddlegram and everything. But I just felt when I flipped it in post that it said something different to me. And, I really liked it much better than just that other moment where my intention when I took it originally was just to have his body kind of cropped, just to see part of his body and not his face, and just have his face reflected in the water. So yeah, and then all in all, as you can see in a lot of the pictures I've taken of my son, he's either with his eyes closed or his face is concealed, or he's in like this suspension state. And to me, that is something that I think runs through my work, is this sense of oniric or dreamlike quality that I really enjoy in photography. That feels like those first old images where people had to stay very still for the long exposure. And if they moved, it felt like ghost-like almost. So that's a kind of atmosphere that I like about photography, how fleeting it is. It's a moment that is gone in an instant. And yeah, again, the water and the portals. And as he grows up, also what comes between us, what divides us. This is him older, just before I stopped photographing. So I stopped photographing when he became 10, and he said, no more photos, no more, not a single one. At the beginning, I used to give him $1, be like, it's $1. But then the bribing didn't work either. So this was one image where I wanted to photograph him, and he went behind the car. There's a car in front of us. And actually that made a very interesting image where the buildings were reflected in the car, but he was on the other side. But I decided when he grew up and said no more photos that I wanted to respect his wishes. And that's when I wrapped the project up and I started to edit it and make the selection to be this project. And this is one self-portrait that I made in it, and that I also feel is very representative of my feelings of motherhood. And so one last thing I wanted to show you, because I want to leave space for us to have a conversation. So it's actually how I turned this project into a photo book. To me, I'm very interested in the practice of the photo book and the photo book as an art form, because it's another way of experiencing photography. It's very different when you're in a gallery and you're looking at an image in a big space or looking at a printed image. The moment is not that intimate, but when you have a book in your hands, it's a very intimate experience. And what I wanted to do with this work was just to do a letter to my son. And I wrote a poem to him expressing kind of my feelings about mothering and about, our life together. And I wanted it to be like a letter. So it would be as a kind of gift to him. And I was very intentional with how I designed the book. It was a collaboration with a wonderful designer called Faride Mereb. The book starts with the poem that starts in the cover and runs through the images. That image is in the back pinned as it appears in family albums. So to me, it was also this node to like family albums and how this photo book could be an image, a gift for him, but also a kind of a family album. And some of the decisions I made for this book were grueling because I took thousands of pictures of my son. And here in the book, there are only 13 pictures. And the images that I chose were deliberately the ones that felt ambiguous and that the universe could be an anonymous universe. There's no images here that tell you this happens in New York City. It could be anywhere. And that was a hard thing to cut out of the book because I love some of the images we have. This is what I was referring to as before as the center of the work, where I kind of have like this image to the left is called Genealogy. And this other one with my son is called Dandelion Dreams, and how this both things inhabit my motherhood. So, I really wanted this book to be kind of like a letter to him and him just reading the poem through it. And what I did also was that I wanted the book itself to be a mirror, since mirrors and the experience of mirroring is so important. So as you see here, you have two texts that are reflecting each other. And what I did in the book is that when you get to the half of it, you can actually flip it and see the same photographs and the same text, but backwards. So I started before with the image of the hand reaching for the window. And in this other reading, I start from the back of the poem and start with another image of him in this kind of tunnel of light. So it's two readings, two experiences mirroring each other, you know, my motherhood in a nutshell. And I think I'm going to stop at there because I've talked too much. Okay.
No, but I love to hear you talk. Thank you so much for sharing all of those collections. I also have a tendency to talk too much, so I thought I would open maybe up to others. If you have any questions, does anyone want to start? I have a whole list. Yes, Danny.
Okay, so I related with you a lot with your personal life, like a hard abusive family, and then you're a single mother. I'm a single mother as well. And when you said you're letting this little person grow up and get close to you, and that's hard sometimes, like I deal with that. And I was wondering, because you seem like you have this just magic superpower where you like tap into this creative like energy and lens that you just see everything with. And I think as a creative person myself, I struggle with kind of like letting go of the past and the hurt and the pain. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you let go of your kind of hard past and like transition into this beautiful little life? Like,
well, really... you know, I think when you're showing the images or the work that you made, I think I've only focused here on the kind of positives or the outcome, but the process is not like something that is very apparent, and the hardship that you find, like these were the images that I edited after a lot of images that felt very banal or that I felt like uninspired or that I didn't want to photograph. But one way that I've found, and for this, I want to show you something. Let me just reach here for a book. Sorry. Okay. One way that I found to kind of work through that was actually the photo book form. And this photo book Umbral was actually my second one. The first one I did was about my father. And it was all about the trauma, part of the trauma that I lived at home. You know, in a nutshell, my father was killed by the government in Dominican Republic when I was 5, and his body was never found. You know, Dominican Republic was under like the continuation of a very long dictatorship of Trujillo, which lasted 30 years. And the following government of Balaguer was very oppressive. It was 12 years of oppression. And during that time, a lot of people were killed, and my father was one of them. And, you know, growing up, I did not, we as a family couldn't grieve him because we couldn't have a funeral, we didn't have the body. And also the government really threatened to silence us if we kept like digging into it. And at home, because my mother was dealing with that loss and she didn't have the tools to talk about it, she got rid of all his images, all his photographs. So I grew up without photographs, wanting to remember my father and not being able to because there were no images. And I think that made me gravitate towards photography a lot as a way of making images and remembering. But as I grew up, I forgot my father. And as an adult, it was something that I carried a lot and that it made me very sad. So I decided to kind of approach this in another way of photography that is not making my own photos. So in this book that I have here, which is called All of Them, I asked my relatives in Dominican Republic to send me the few pictures they could have of my parents, of my dad when that they had. And I went to a thrift shop in Brooklyn, and in a big pile of abandoned photographs, like those old photos they sell at thrift shops, I bought a bunch of them. And in this book, what I did, let me see if I can. In this book, what I did was that I started to use the images of, sorry, let me get through the images of strangers. In this case, this image I purchased of a little girl that might have the age that I had when my father passed away, and started to have a conversation with my father, which is weaved through the book. The photos of the strangers are in conversations with the few photos of my parents, like this one that someone gave me. And I placed it in the book right in the middle where there's a scene between them, or there's this imperfection in the photo that it was ripped and it resembles like this kind of lightning bolt, what happened, you know, that kind of tragedy. But in the book, I also start to talk about the abuse I suffered at home, because my mother was very abusive, and because of her own abusive childhood. And, you know, I start to talk about domestic violence and sexual abuse and like all these things in the book. And I just start to ask my dad these questions, how she was, if my mom was this way. And I just had to start to have a conversation with him in it. And after doing that, I want to show you one specific spread in the book. Let me see if I can find it. So, sorry, I wasn't prepared to do a page through. So I'm trying, okay. So this specific image that I have here, where you can see a girl and like a woman and this man lurking in the back, was one image that I use and it's an image I purchased. It's obviously from this other era, like the 50s. Is one image I used to talk about the sexual abuse I experienced from my stepfather. And in this image, this man lurking in the shadows, I say in the book, he was always lurking in the shadows of our house, making the space between her and I grow larger and larger. I used to wake up with his hands inside my panties. So in saying this thing so blatantly and openly, and talking about it with my dad in this fictional way, in this way that blurs fiction and reality, I was able to grieve. And that was wonderful for me. And I still get the chills when I think about this work, because I wasn't able to speak about my father without like getting a crackle in my voice. But when I did this book, I wanted to do a book so I can give it to people and I can talk about these things, because also these things are not talked about in my country. Women feel like it's their fault when these things happen. And I think that's common across cultures, but you know, it brought also a lot of strife in my family. When I started to speak about these things, they felt very uneasy about me airing the family laundry, but it helped me to go through it. So in a very long-winded answer to your question, I think the act of photographing maybe didn't necessarily help me to get over this stuff. I was able to do it through found images or vernacular images or tapping into family archives. And that's something also that is at the core of my practice. I work a lot with archives and seeing how you can work with images that are already in circulation. Sorry, that was long, but yeah.
That was really beautiful and inspiring. Thank you so much. So you like really just took all this pain you were carrying and like tore it apart and like let everybody see it. That's amazing. Love that.
Thank you.
Erika, you touched on it a little bit in the beginning. You talked about how you started photographing with your son, but when did like the passion for photography like really sink in? Like what was the beginning of this?
The beginning was when my son was born, and I, with my first tax return, the child tax return that they give you when you have a child, I'm like, yes, $3,000, I'm buying a camera. So I went and bought a camera to kind of like just photograph life at home. And actually those photos from the first 4 years of his life are gone because I had them in a hard drive and So I quickly learned, okay, back up your work. But it allowed me to like make new images or think about making images differently. And that's how it started. And then once the smartphones came in, and I I purchased one, I think it was 2010 when I had my first iPhone. I just started to photograph with the iPhone everywhere without having like the DSLR, or I hadn't really found the instrument that worked for me. So after photographing with my phone, like for example, that image of my son in the water in Coney Island, it was with the iPhone. And, you know, like I said, I need to have a smaller camera that feels like a second hand. So now I only use 24 millimeter lens, which is very wide and allows me to have more things there, and that is very small and that functions like a film camera. I can make decisions right then and there, and I don't have to be looking through the viewfinder. I can just do it in the dials, and that's how it started.
So at some point, you know, you went from just being a mom with a camera to now where you're invited to photograph celebrities, you photograph for articles and publications. And I saw that you just did some photography for Playgirl, which of course I had to mention. So how do you go from a mom with a camera to being this person that people seek out to do photographs?
Well, you know, with like magazine assignments or editorial work, it's very rare. Like it happens sometimes, but I haven't really cultivated a practice around editorial work. Like the friends that I have or colleagues that are really good at it, they invest in really good equipment for editorial work. They like build those connections. For me, it just happens like with Playgirl. I was invited to provide some images for this essay a woman wrote, and she was a single mom and she was writing about that experience. And from my personal project that came to be. But I have to admit that whenever I am on assignment and they give me like a specific, you know, you have to photograph this, I really suck at it. And it's always so tedious for me because I don't think that way. And it's not something that I see as like a career goal. For me, what I want is to be able to work more intently in my projects and see how I can experiment with different ways of making work. So when my work turned a little bit was with my project Umbral. Well, first with the photo book of my father, which I I published before my Umbral project. And that the reception it had of people wanting to talk to me about it and they invited me to some panels. I presented it at the MoMA, this panel that they have there for book artists. And, you know, that inspired me to say like, hey, you know, let me look at my work more intently and see what projects I have that are existing already. And it was a natural transition from that to being very serious about Umbral and my other projects. And one way I did that was actually, I took this photo book class and a couple of classes on how to build your projects. And I started to write about my intentions. That was very crucial. You know, with this project, I want to do that, you know, polishing that description and kind of editing the work. And once I had something that felt like a good piece of writing about it, concise, and a good edit of images, I started to send it out for submissions and open calls. And that's when I won the En Foco grant. And that was the first time I submitted my work for anything, and I won it. And that was in 2017. I've only been at this for like less than 4 years in it, like really professionally. So, yeah.
Well, I'm really impressed with like the themes and the project ideas that you come up with. So like if someone else were, you know, to want to investigate like coming up with a theme and doing a series, where do you think is a good place to begin?
Well, It really depends what you like in photography. Like as I mentioned before, there are so many, that's the beauty of photography. There is so many ways of working. There can be like conceptual approaches to it where you say, well, I want to talk about, I don't know, family or death. How can I make images that represent this? Or, but for me, it's mostly connected with a sense of joy. So how can I make images that allow me to be present and have this sense of joy? And I always enjoy going into the place and allowing the image to find me by chance. So to me, the act of photographing or making these projects comes by chance. And then when I am revisiting my images and parsing through my archive, I start to see the connecting threads. But I don't think about them before, like say, I want to go here and make images, because it kills the joy for me. I want to remain joyful in the act of making images, and also playful. Like that's why I really love Lee Freelander and Bruce Gilden, although he can be a little bit of a, he can be controversial, but I love their playfulness, or they have fun with it. So what I would say for people starting to make a project is to photograph what you're interested in and what gives you joy, or what you feel fascinated and curious about. A lot of photography, I think, is about curiosity, so just photographing the stuff that you're interested in, starting there. And one really good advice that I was given during a class was, because I felt like, well, I'm a single mom. I cannot really, travel the world and go do these big projects. And, I can't really do that. So I'm not going to move forward as a photographer. And one very smart professor said to me, start from your own life. Examine your own life first and see what that has. There's so much richness there already. And that doesn't mean that you have to photograph life at home or family. It can be something small, like your neighborhood or someone else that you come across in the street, but examine your own life first. We have no choice right now but to do that.
Right. We've examined every nook and cranny of our homes and our lives at this point. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have a question. So I've noticed, remember earlier you said that you do your best to make sure you don't repeat yourself. So like when you're taking your photos, you try to make sure everything's different. And it's not like making that active effort, like, oh, this can't be the same, but like and making sure you have fun with it, just not feeling like you're taking the same thing over again. And sometimes I struggle with that because I'm not sure if it's because of the one photo class I had, and I'm starting to, the way that I understand composition, I'm really big on balance. And I don't know if it's a stylistic thing that I do, and just everything has to be balanced, and sometimes it feels kind of flat because I'm so focused on that, or if it's me kind of hitting a standstill because it's just like all the same and not different anymore.
I think, there are periods where it's hard to kind of like grow out of that comfort zone. And to me, like, I don't know you, I haven't seen your work or know your work, but I feel sometimes when we are at that point where we feel ourselves making the same image, or it's because we are in a comfort zone. And there needs to be something that kind of like shakes you out of that orbit. Sometimes that can look very different. Sometimes it can be taking a class with someone that you respect and that you want to learn a new approach. Sometimes it's trying to make work in a way that you wouldn't expect. Like, for example, when I did the book about my dad, I've never worked with archival images or found images, but I experimented and tried something new. So I think you are in need of something to shake you out of it. And that can take just different shapes. to me, something that has been really instrumental is being in a learning space with other artists, taking classes. I take classes all the time, just to learn about people's practices, to inspire you. And also because I'm a huge photo book nerd and I love photo books, seeing photo books, going to a library or to the Strand if you're in New York, and just delving into a single body of work can spark so many ideas. And films also really help me sometimes to shake off that funk, because it's another way of like building a narrative or approaching image making. When the image moves is something that I find inspires my work sometimes. And also aesthetically, like for example, in Terrence Malick's films that have like this sort of like beautiful usage of light, have really inspired me to look at light that way in real life. So yeah, that
was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't, COVID brain, sorry.
Oh no, that helped me a lot, because I keep coming back to this idea that the reason why I'm stagnant when it comes to a lot is because I'm comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's helpful to have that reinforcement.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a little bit of shaking you out of the comfort zone.
Hyla, can I jump in here?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I did not have my mic on earlier because old. Anyway, but this is a good moment. My question is about the photo books. That's my area of interest as an art historian. And I'm so pleased to see your interest in that. And I'm curious about two things. I'm curious if when you are thinking about what images to include in a photo book, if you approach that differently than in a show, a curated show. I mean, you mentioned the intimate format, and I'm 100% agree. And I'm also curious about the type that's in the text that's included in the books, how you decide what is included and where. Mm-hmm. There are definitely some photographers who are gonna, sorry, that's my cat. Okay.
Don't worry, mine is here right next to me.
It's a cat-friendly Zoom.
As soon as I start talking, she just needs to get up on the table. Anyway, some photographers historically have been like, I don't want any text with those images. They need to speak for themselves as a narrative, and maybe an index in the back if you need a title. Others, want to put something kind of definitive with it. And just as a footnote, I love that your book reads backwards and forward, that you offered that option. That's great. So
Yeah, I mean, I approach both processes very differently. Almost the opposite when I'm doing a show than when I'm doing a book. I think the purpose of the show is to service the image, for people to be able to look at the image in a way that connects with the work you're showing. Like if you show really large images, what does that say? Like when I exhibit Umbral, I don't go more than 24 inches in the images, because I feel it's an intimate work and I don't want like a photo of my son like taking a whole wall. So the way that I approach putting together a show is being very intentional with how people navigate the room. So when I exhibited Umbral in Dominican Republic in a gallery there, the gallery had all these different rooms. And the way that we established it was in a way that people could go out. And by the way, I put the images and the poem was also in the walls in fragments. And people kept asking like, wait, but where does the poem start? Or, and I advised them to just start wherever they wanted and have different readings of it. So I like to play with space and how you can kind of divide sections of the work, images that are like very potent, like, or very powerful, to put them somewhere where they don't have something next to it, diluting it. So I'm just thinking about how people are going to navigate the room. But thinking about photo books always have to come from a concept. if there's not a concept, I don't think you have a photo book. I mean, there are many things that are out there that are called photo books, but I don't believe they're photo books. Like they're monographs, or they house
Right. I agree.
a certain body of work from or certain images from the photographer. But when you're looking at it, you're not looking at a cohesive concept. You're looking at a kind of retrospective on a page, and that's fine and valid as making a book. But the kind of bookmaking practice that I'm really into is where you have three elements in unison. You have the concept, you have the content, which in my case, I really like to work with image and text, and I'm gonna talk about it more. And also you have the design. The design has to service both your images and your concept. Like with Umbral, I felt that I wanted it to be intimate. So the concept was to have this kind of envelope as a kind of letter, as a kind of, so the both design, images, and also the visual elements of the images of the mirror are reflected in the design. So to me, that's the three things happening at once. When I took a class to try to make this book first, the teacher, and I never forget it, it was a white male teacher, and I said to him, I want to make a book, and I want to write something. And he said, don't write, because you're gonna ruin it.
That's part of why I'm asking. Yeah, I've heard that advice before.
Don't write, because you're gonna ruin it. The images should speak for themselves. Okay, so this is the same teacher that in the same class, he was showing as examples Larry Sultan, Pictures from Home, which is heavily laced with text.
Dwayne Wrinkles.
Being Raised by Wolves by Jim Goldberg. All these books by white men, the boys club in the photo.
I know it. Yeah.
And they're all with text. And how come they're not ruining the work? So I was very discouraged that he didn't allow me or motivated me to use text in the work. And I was just very dissatisfied with that. And that kind of stayed with me. And after I thought about it, and this was somebody very knowledgeable about photo books, I felt how this was an extension, first of all, of not allowing women to talk about their narratives or having the preconceived notion that women are going to ruin things by talking about them or making them very emotional. And also championing male works. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to do it this way. I finished the class, but then I was able to edit this work with someone else. And I think that's a very purist and traditional way of approaching images. I think some of the most beautiful photo books that I have here at home. I wish we could do another section where I take you through my bookshelf of books.
So do I.
That are amazing, and they have a lot of text, and they're experimental.
Yeah.
And,
So the text in your book, is there any preface or intro or essay? It didn't look like it. Looks very much treated like an art object.
Well, with Umbral, I wanted to do a little bit of damage control from my first book, which is terribly designed because I knew nothing about photo books or design when I did it. I did it through Blurb. So the typography is terrible. And it's exactly like what not to do, a hardcover book. Yes, I want like a serious book. I'm going to make it hardcover. And then I did like this whole, not essay, but a kind of foreword where I was gonna, like an introduction, where I was talking about my motivation of it. And I don't regret it because I think this work needed that for me to express that.
I was just gonna say that. I think that project needed.
Yeah, it worked that way. But then I feel as I, grow and learn how to make books and I'm into that practice more, that a sense of mystery is very important. Especially in a photo book where you don't guide the reader experience, so you don't hold their hand that much, and you allow the design and the images, how you've placed them, your sequencing, you allow the images to do that instead of your words. But I always feel compelled to include either poetry in it or some anecdotes or fragmented writings. They're always fragmented. Like I almost never include something really big, but just fragmented pieces that feels like glimpses.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's exactly what I was curious about.
Great.
Can you repeat the three things you said were the elements that are in unison when you make a photo book?
Yeah, like the concept and also the content. And the content usually includes your images, but it can be also other things that can be in conversation with your images, like text, illustration, or archival material, or whatever things you want to include, and also the design. And I think that those three things have to be put together like this. And that's why sometimes you find photo books that are incredible and the photography is not even that good. Because at the end of the day, when you're making a photo book, you're not only thinking about the photograph, you're thinking about the experience of the reader and what they're getting out of the book. So, yeah.
Does anyone else have any burning questions? I love how we transitioned from we had these self-portraits and these intimate photographs between a mother and son to these very public images from Coney Island. It really shows your range. And then going into books, and I know you've also done performance art and like film documentaries. Erika, thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. I'd love to, when everything is over, hopefully, I'd love to be in person in one class and just be in that space. I really miss the classroom space where we can like inspire each other and have conversations. So I just want to say good luck to everyone with your projects. And and thank you for listening to me and for inviting me to your class.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us.
Bye.
Bye.